Starting today, we have a 5-part special report from the land of pyramids and sand dunes, Egypt, to explore how the arid country uses and reuses resources. Today's segment focuses on the ingenious ways the Egyptians used to maximize the potential of every drop of water. Known as the gift of the Nile, Egypt owes its existence to the longest river in the world. On my right is Egypt's most important river, the Nile. Not only is it the cradle of Egypt's great river valley civilization, it is also the source of the fertile black soil along its banks. Bustling with most of Egypt's agricultural activities, the Nile Valley and Delta, though covering only 4% of the country's land, is home to 99% of the population. Lush vegetation ends precisely where the black soil cuts off, expanding into a dry, barren desert that stretches for miles on end. For 5,000 years, Egyptians have been actively devising ways to maximize the use of their lifeline, the Nile. At the ancient temple of Edfu that is more than 3,600 years old, there is a tunnel with a slit at the end through which water from the Nile flows in. The height of the water in the tunnel would tell if the river water is high this year, which means a good harvest can be anticipated. In ancient times, Egyptians gauged the height of the Nile to determine how much trace minerals and nutrients would be deposited by the flood to fertilize floodplain. Nowadays, the Nile is less of a barometer and more of a source of agricultural irrigation.
Actually, it takes almost 80% of the water of the water budget in Egypt. But the water system in Egypt is 95% dependent on the River Nile. The water system in Egypt is as old as the country itself, because without the River Nile there should have been no Egypt at all.
The desert country's modern hydraulic system is also powered by the waters of the Nile. Located in the south of Egypt, the Aswan High Dam was built around the 1970s to control the flooding of the river and forms one of the 7 biggest reservoirs in the world, Lake Nasser. Water from the Nile is delivered to the lake through a main canal, which is then channeled to other distributaries that flow northwards, sending water to the capital Cairo and other cities and towns. Farming accounts for most of the water usage in the country, so water saving must begin with agricultural irrigation.
Convert the earth canals from which farmers take water to irrigate their fields into a lined canal. Plain concrete lined canal. And if you reduce the water area of the canal from the big earth canal to a smaller lined canal, then you reduce the area of water exposed to the atmosphere, and you reduce evaporation, and you also reduce seepage from the sides of the canal.
The African country has come up with more ways to minimize waste.
For the precise leveling of land by laser beam, so when the land is leveled, water will not run on the surface of the land and go straight from the canal to the drain.
Land leveling in Egypt is done through laser beam technology, whereby a prism inside the laser transmitter rotates to reflect beams to create a plane of light that are intercepted by a sensor on the tractor, which interprets the signals to determine whether to raise or lower the drag bucket to smooth the land. This practice ensures minimal seepage of irrigation water on the land and in turn doubles the yield. And the wastewater from farming irrigation does not get thrown away.
The government stipulates that all farmlands must have a tank to collect wastewater that is high in salt content. This water is then sent to the treatment plant to be recycled and reused.
The fertilizer-infused wastewater from the farmlands is the main pollutant of the Nile. In order to make use of every drop, there are more than 200 wastewater treatment plants throughout Egypt. However, the great river faces yet more threat from climate change. Before, Egypt's summer lasted around 3 months from June to September. Now the hot season is 6 months long, causing the Mediterranean Sea to rise. The inhabitants of the Delta area bear the brunt of the weather abnormalities.
A great land, a great castle will be disappeared, like Rashid, Edfina, a great area of Dumyat city.
For this desert nation, a comprehensive conservation effort perhaps holds the only key to protect Egypt's shrinking homeland.
In Egypt, where the annual rainfall in the desert areas is less than 30 millimeters a year and around 80 millimeters for other parts of the country, water is liquid gold. Yet in the Sahara Desert, rich deposits of underground water give rise to oases on the surface, which support small communities. The Nile Delta has suffered subsidence from groundwater pumping, but the hard limestone underneath the desert stops the same phenomenon happening to oases. Yet the water may run out someday. Strict regulations have been put in place to stop over-excavation of underground reserves. In the latest of our series of features from Egypt, we go to the Bahariya Oasis for a glimpse of life among the Saharan sand dunes.
You may be inclined to think that this is a villa on a dreamy tropical island. This is actually the Bahariya Oasis in Egypt, situated some 360 kilometers southwest of Cairo. Local resident Mohammed invites the diary reporters to his home. His wife serves a plate of the local specialty, Egyptian date, for the guests from Taiwan. The dry climate of the country seals the sugary sweetness in the plum dates that were washed with groundwater, which is used to irrigate the date palms too.
There are 7 underground lakes, so we have an abundant water supply here to use. Further down, around 1,200 meters below, there are hot springs too, but they are not as hot as the ones at 1,500 meters underneath, which are around 40 degrees Celsius.
Desert dweller Mohammed says to survive in the sand dunes, even in the comfort of an oasis, every household must have a reservoir.
Water saving is very important here. All the groundwater is pumped to and stored in the tanks, which are only opened when needed, such as for irrigation. We don't waste any drop.
With scarce rain and a high rate of evaporation, the desert's only reliable source of fresh water comes from underground, yielding around 530,000 cubic meters per year. In addition, as inhabitants along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea also rely on groundwater, the usage of which makes up 1% of the country's total water consumption, one wonders if pumping water from underground reservoirs inevitably causes subsidence.
Yes, there is no sinking in the oasis because the oasis mainly formed by a theory that it composed mainly of limestone. Limestone is a hard rock. As I mentioned before, in the delta, it's a soft rocks like shale and mudstone, which with water become saturated and become sinking with structure.
The Nile Delta is sinking because of its structural property. Constituting mostly of clay, when groundwater is pumped out, the reduced water pressure means a loss of support for the beds of clay and hence the collapse of the ground. However, underneath an oasis are layers of limestone, which are hard enough to stand firm even when groundwater is lost.
Mostly the big or the huge aquifers belonging to an age, to a period or geologic period since millions and millions of years ago. It's about 300 million years ago in an age called Paleozoic.
Formed millions of years ago, fresh groundwater may run out one day due to prolonged droughts. To forestall the possible water crisis, the Egyptian government has been regulating the use of groundwater.
Every household is free to excavate wells that are less than 400 meters deep. As for hot springs, which are found 1,200 meters beneath the ground, only the government has the right to access them.
In addition to restricting the depth of water excavation, the government also controls the number of new wells. The distance between wells must also be greater than 1 kilometer. By controlling access to the precious underground reserve, the desert nation hopes to guarantee its people a sufficient supply of water for many years to come.
According to the United Nations, the phenomenon of desertification is worsening around the globe, affecting 1/3 of the Earth's surface and the 1 billion people who live in dry areas. Being the most arid nation in the world, Egypt has been on the front line of the battle with desertification for as long as its history. More than 95% of the country is covered in sand that's continually spreading. To decelerate the growth of the desert, Egypt has been planting olive trees. In the latest in our series of features on water resource management in Egypt, we start our journey at the pyramids.
A masterpiece of architecture, Egypt's pyramids are a symbol of the pharaoh's ultimate power and sacrosanctity. Nowadays, to serve the tourists who come to admire their great beauty, at the foot of these magnificent monuments, camels are ready for rides. These ungulates are biologically gifted to survive in the infinite expanse of harsh sand dunes. Here in Egypt, more than 95% of the land is desert. Egypt's famed White Desert, studded with chalk rock mushrooms, used to be under the sea millions of years ago.
During the Cenomanian or the Cretaceous, the sea invades the deserts from north to south until it reached to Aswan at the south of Egypt. So the White Desert is in Bahariya Oasis in the heart of the Egyptian desert, Egyptian Western Deserts. So the sea was deep at that time. The deepening of the sea formed chalk or white limestone, which deposited for at least 100 meters of chalk and limestone. And after the sea retreats or regressed, now the desert become white.
The limestone in the sand holds the key to the mysteries surrounding the desert's prehistoric identity. The limestone layer in the White Desert was formed by coral reefs under the sea millions of years ago. Coral synthesizes the calcium carbonate that is dissolved in the seawater into its structure, which later becomes hard reef after the coral dies. Combined with shells and held together by coralline algae, the reefs crystallize and become part of the seafloor, which gets pushed upwards by vertical crustal movement to become land. Formerly submerged under the sea, due to human activities in the recent years, the desert is now morphing into a monster on a growth spurt. Overpumping of groundwater along the Mediterranean coast has caused the intrusion of seawater into the ground, resulting in the salinization of many of Egypt's farmlands. The lack of vegetation in the soil, coupled with exposure to strong winds, leads to further desertification of the land. Currently, arable land in Egypt is only 3.3% of the total, but even that figure is diminishing.
Desertification increases the rate of CO2 in the atmosphere because plants remove CO2 normally from the atmosphere. So with increased deterioration of the desert and the desertification, the CO2 will be available. So the problem will be more worse.
With less and less land for cultivation, Egyptians are drawing on the wisdom of their forefathers to battle desertification. Inspired by the paintings of olive trees on temple walls that are thousands of years old, desert farmers have found a way.
Olive trees are a good plant because the roots hold soil together and purify the earth. These shrubs are hardy and are able to thrive in salinized soil. The 210 kilometers of desert road here is flanked by around 2 million olive trees.
Agricultural specialists in Egypt have developed new watering methods for these olive trees. Israel's patented drip irrigation technology has also been introduced, whereby water is delivered straight to the roots, saving half of the amount needed.
We are an organic farm with natural fertilizers and pesticides. We feed our trees with a locally produced mineral fertilizer that is very effective. It nourishes the plants without salinizing the soil.
The organic farming methods and the water-saving drip irrigation technology have allowed Egyptian farmers to grow beautiful olives in the wasteland, producing food for the growing population while preserving precious soil.
In the last few days, Dai Headlines has been bringing you stories on Egypt's successful attempts to exploit its renewable energy sources and save and reuse its water. Today we go to the capital city of Cairo, where the NGO Solar Cities is helping poor local communities harness the energy of the sun by teaching residents how to make solar water heaters and also bio-waste digesters that break down kitchen scraps into fertilizer and biogas.
In ancient Egypt, Amun-Ra is the solar deity, representing the bright, mighty sun that is now a reliable source of clean energy for the desert nation.
It's not like some other places in Europe or other countries that sun exists only for a few hours every day. It's always there, even in the winter time, only very few hours per day that the sun is not available.
The abundant daylight in Egypt is like a gift from the gods. In recent years, the government began developing solar energy, most notably in the country's first solar power plant, Kuremat, in the south of Cairo, which is soon to be completed. With an overall capacity of 140 megawatts, the plant will provide enough energy for a month for 280 families. In this desert country, solar energy is also used to desalinate seawater.
Solar system, or generally the renewable energy resources, to find another source or resource of water. For example, here in Egypt, in the last years, the new action is the desalination.
The non-government environmental organization Solar Cities has also been working with local residents to harness the energy of the sun. To tune in to Egypt's pop radio station, Solar Cities director in Cairo, Hannah Fathi, plugs in the solar-powered radio.
And you also help your neighbors to install the solar power panel?
Yeah, when they see it, they can come, and if they want, many people, I tell them, if you have the materials, I will build it for you for free.
For free. So
just encourage them to do it.
How many families have installed the solar power panels?
In Garber City, we have around 17 ones.
Helping neighbors turn their homes into solar houses, Hannah also travels to other African countries at his own cost to promote biofuel.
I went to Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi with National Geographic and Thomas to build biogas system for the Maasai people and for the people in Kenya in a village called Kalinzi, because they still using charcoal and wood, so we are helping them to save and protect the rainforest.
To demonstrate his work, Hannah shows the Dai reporters how his solar water heater is built.
And this aluminium is recycled, it's per kilo, and the pipes, as you can see, and also on the roof you will see a lot of pipes. I save it.
Hannah's DIY heater is made up of 2 water tanks that hold cold and hot water respectively. The heating mechanism occurs at the solar collectors, which use copper pipes for efficient heat conductivity. The panel is coated with tar or black paint to absorb heat from the sun and then covered with a piece of glass to achieve a greenhouse effect, thus minimizing heat loss during its transfer. The cold water that flows beneath the collectors gets heated up and stored in the other tank for domestic use. According to Hannah, the green heater can store up to 200 liters of hot water, which is enough for 14 showers. However, is the water warm enough?
Sometimes 60, 70,
Wow.
75. We can try it now.
OK。我们来试试看那个用太阳能加热的热水到底可以到多热哦。
Now? Yeah, count 5 now.
You are getting hotter and hotter.
Yeah. 1, 2,
3, 4, 5. My skin turns red.
The solar heater really lives up to its name, and its creator's passion about renewable energy is just as fervent as the sun. Hannah says a slight change in our lifestyle will make a big difference for the environment. For instance, this unassuming black barrel contains homemade biofuel concocted from leftovers.
As you can see, the onion skin, rotten rice, the watermelon skin or the orange, anything, you can blend it, put it for the bacteria, they will break it down, digest it, produce the gas. It's so easy.
Hannah's wife uses the biogas produced by the digester to heat up water for a cup of steamy hot tea. Determined to exploit clean energy alternatives, Hannah says in the future he will impart all his green knowledge to his son so that together they can involve more people in this environmentally friendly initiative. The concept of cradle to cradle has become a mainstream conservation approach in the recent years. The idea is that regeneration, sustainability, and coexistence with nature should govern human lives. So today, in the final part of our special reports from Egypt, we go to a very unique slum in the capital Cairo, where the population of 16,000 relies on recycling the city's waste to make a living. Locals, also known as zabalin or garbage collectors, recycles 85% of the trash, a rate higher than other developing countries. In our last visit to Egypt, we went to a tour around the Zabalin community and also made a stop at the Al Azhar Park, the equivalent of Cairo's Central Park, which used to be a stinking landfill. The first call to prayer of the day wakes Egypt up to a fresh new morning. More than 90% of the population in Egypt are Muslim. However, on the outskirts of Cairo, there is a sprawling slum where residents are primarily Coptic Christians. This is the home of the Zabalin, or garbage collectors in Arabic. Residents of this neighborhood make a living off the city's daily mountain of waste. This is Egypt's first and biggest recycling community. As you can see behind me, many of the rooftops are crammed with garbage, like plastic bottles. Local residents have been collecting and sorting trash for more than 40 years. The Zabalin community has 16,000 residents. The old and young are almost all involved in collecting and sorting waste.
I mean, the beginning they were sorting and now they're recycling, and now we recycle around 85% of the garbage.
The Zabalin recycle 85% of the waste, which is about 25% higher than Taiwan's recycling rate. Every day, an average of 6,000 tons of rubbish from Cairo is sent here, keeping residents busy with the recycling work that is their primary means of livelihood. And this kind of lifestyle begins at a very young age. We're here at a very special school that not only teaches students Arabic and mathematics, but also recycling because it is a community-wide activity. It is here that children first learn the know-how of recycling. Lessons like these will help youngsters appreciate resources and care for the environment.
It was a study and I know everything here, and I love this school, and I want to learn him.
The young educator, who is very passionate about teaching, asked his top student to show the diary reporters how recycling is done at the school. 15-year-old Abraham puts on gloves and with practiced efficiency sifts through used shampoo bottles. It takes Abraham less than a second to tear off a sticker label. The 150 students here are all veteran recyclers. 100,000 bottles go through the school every month. On the walls of the classrooms are tables detailing how much recycling each child has done in the month. The proceeds from selling recyclables all go to the school fund. Here in the Zabalin community, recycling is an indispensable part of everyone's life. Even shops sell products made from used items. All the cards and paper bags you see here are made from waste paper and fabric that have been recycled. This workshop employs only women from the local community, which helps improve their lives. In addition to paper and fabric, the raw materials for these novel cards and gifts include kitchen scraps, which have been creatively reused.
This color made by the onion skin. They cut it and they put it.
What other people normally throw into the rubbish bin gets a new lease of life in the hands of the Zabalin. And the schools and gift shops aren't the only pride of this remarkably eco-friendly shantytown. It is also home to Cairo's bright green gem, the Al Azhar Park. This is Cairo's biggest and most beautiful park, the Al Azhar Park. You cannot tell that this was actually a pest-infested landfill 10 years ago. Where I stand, there's not a trace of bad smells.
They start first to clean the big things like the rocks and the cans and the trash which was in the top of the mountain, and then they start to put like sheets of soil, like many sheets to make like isolation between the trash underneath and between the plant itself.
What was a rubbish top is now a green space that has generated business opportunities for the poor locals. Thanks to Zabaleen, the densely populated city of Cairo retains its beauty as it continues to shine with historical grandeur next to the mystic River Nile.